Hello, and welcome to Preserve Benefits and Protect Funds to Enhance Quality of Life. This session is sponsored by NYSARC. My name is Farah Sanchez, and I'm Director of Entitlements at Adapt Community Network. A couple of housekeeping rules. Please put any questions for the presenters in the Q&A. To ask a question, simply click on the Q&A icon towards the bottom of your screen. Type your question and hit send. The chat box will only be used to post information pertaining to Adapt Community Network and this webinar. Information about how to access translation will be available in the chat. Please make sure your questions are general in nature, as this webinar will give general information only and will not address specific cases. In the interest of privacy, please do not include personal information. If you are having any technical difficulties, there will be answers to common questions in the chat section. This is being recorded and you can watch again online at www.adaptcommunitynetwork.org. Be sure to follow us on social at Adapt We Change. It's my pleasure to welcome to you today featuring Sarah Grimes. Sarah Grimes is the Director of Outreach and Community Relations at NYSARC Trust Community Services, a 501c3 nonprofit that administers pooled supplemental needs trusts and has helped over 25,000 people in all counties of New York protect funds to qualify and maintain financial eligibility for Medicaid and SSI benefits. Sarah has presented on special needs trust and government benefit eligibility and events for the New York State Office of the Aging. At New York State Bar Association section meetings and at various regional bar associations throughout New York State. She routinely provides in-service trainings to attorneys, social workers, service providers, and families to aware awareness for the benefits of using pooled trusts to live independently in the community for as long as possible. Sarah is a strong advocate for trust beneficiaries, helping individuals maximize the benefits they receive while using the funds in their trust to provide for life-enhancing items and services. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Grimes.
Thank you, Farah. I'm going to share my screen, get my slides up for you. All right, wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to be here to give you guys a quick overview on supplemental needs trusts. And we're also going to talk a little bit about ABLE accounts. And talking about how these tools can help you or your loved one be able to protect and preserve their financial eligibility for means-tested government benefits, and be able to put money into an account that will help to provide the financial resources to give them a better quality of life. Now, just a quick overview before we get started on what some of these vital government benefits are. A person who has a disability will often receive various services through government benefits. Some of these benefits are what we call means tested, which means that you can only have a certain amount of money in your name and qualify for these programs. So your eligibility for these services is based on your financial resources. Those are things like supplemental security income benefits, Medicaid, which provides health benefits and services. It can also be things like food stamps and also some housing benefits. HUD or Section 8 housing is going to be based on your financial eligibility to qualify. And means-tested benefits is primarily what a supplemental needs trust or an ABLE account is protecting. There are also benefits that an individual may utilize that are not considered means-tested. These are things like Social Security disability income, so SSDI, not SSI, and I know they're very similar, so not to be confused with SSI. SSDI is something that you earn based on your ability to work and contribute money to the Social Security system. And if at some point in your life you become disabled, you're able to draw on this benefit based on your work record. So that's something that you're eligible for based on your ability to work at some point during your lifetime and not based on how much money you have in your name. Child disability benefits, or they used to be referred to as disabled adult child benefits or DAC benefits, are considered an earned benefit. That is something that your child can be eligible for based on when they became disabled. So they had to be disabled prior to age 22. And what it means is that they're able to collect on their parent's work record. When their parent either retires or passes away, they're able to draw on the Social Security benefit that their parent paid into throughout their lifetime. And then we also have Medicare benefits. That's another option, which is generally something that someone would qualify for after they're over the age of 65. But it is a medical benefit that's also available to people with disabilities who receive Social Security disability income for at least 2 years. So those are benefits that you earn and are not based on your financial income and assets. Now, the primary benefits that a supplemental needs trust or an ABLE account will protect is going to be Medicaid and SSI. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on what these programs are before we start talking about the tools to protect them. So supplemental security income is a benefit that's available to people that have limited financial resources. This is if your loved one or you are not able to work generally. And you must have some form of disability in order to qualify for this benefit. And it's based on you having very low income or not any income at all. If your child is under the age of 18, your eligibility for SSI or their eligibility for SSI will be based on the parent's financial resources until they become 18. And so in some cases, a child may not be eligible for SSI while it's based on their parents' income and resources. But when they become 18, it will be based on their income and assets, and they would be able to apply for that benefit. Supplemental security income generally provides cash payments to an individual to help cover the costs of things like food and shelter. And as of 2023, the maximum benefit is currently $914 a month. So someone, depending on their eligibility, is going to receive some form of cash payment from SSI up to $914 a month. And if they're in a congregate care setting, they might get a little bit more than that. And there's a chart, which I'd link to at the bottom of the screen here to reference if you have any questions on the different levels. And the key here is that a person that qualifies for SSI generally has very low income. That's how they become eligible for SSI. And they also have a limit on how much money they can have in their name or in a bank account. So limit on the countable assets that they can have. Resources is another term for that. It also means that when you receive supplemental security income benefits, money that you earn, or so if you're working, or money that's considered unearned by someone paying for something for you, that would be considered in-kind support and maintenance, can impact the amount of money you receive from SSI. So it can reduce what you get in generally the following month or maybe 2 months, depending on how long it takes for the Social Security Administration to be informed of those changes. So examples of that could be wages. If the person is under 18 and it's based on your parent's work income and assets, it could be that the parent is receiving payments, alimony, child support, things like that, which could be reducing a person's SSI. And a trust can be used to help with that. And the key real importance beyond just the cash payments with SSI is that this is a gateway to Medicaid eligibility. $1 of SSI will automatically qualify an individual to receive Medicaid health benefits. Another important thing to note about SSI is that if somebody was receiving SSI before their parent became retired or died, and then they start to get DAC benefits from their parent's work record, this is going to increase their income and could potentially reduce the amount of money they get from SSI every month. Those individuals, even though DAC is not a means-tested benefit, would still be subject to the SSI resource limits because the individual would be eligible for SSI if it was not for that money that they're getting from DAC benefits. So that's an important thing to just understand. Some people will eventually start getting DAC and no longer get SSI cash payments, but they're still subject to the resource limits for SSI. Medicaid is the other primary benefit that a trust or an ABLE account will be used to protect. And Medicaid is going to be able to assist with support services health benefits, and additional programming that the individual may want to qualify for, like OPWDD services. It can help them access things like residential programs, day hab, and other supports and services like respite that might support caregivers, as well as community-based long-term care services, and even long-term care services in a nursing home. In order to qualify for Medicaid, a person's financial assets and income have to be below certain levels if you fall into the age, blind, and disabled category. And if you are receiving Medicaid services and you would like to work and you want to be able to earn more income and assets, you can opt to switch to the Medicaid buy-in program for working people with disabilities. And this allows people with disabilities to have a little bit higher income limits. It allows them to earn more in income. The asset limits for this year are still the same. And a person is eligible for this program up to the age of 65. Now, it's also important to note that while you can only have a certain amount of income or assets in your name and be eligible for Medicaid, certain assets are exempt. So your primary residence, your primary vehicle, you can own a home, you can own a car and qualify for Medicaid. Those things won't count against you. And there are other exemptions that are definitely worth looking into. Another one is retirement accounts. I often get questions from people, they're looking to get on Medicaid and they want to know, should I spend down my entire retirement account and distribute it into a trust? And the answer in New York State is that it's not necessary. A retirement account in New York State is exempt as long as you're taking money out of that account. So if you're already over the age of 65, and I think as of this year, it's over 72, where you're required to be taking money out of that account, you're already doing that. If you are under that age where you're not currently taking distributions from your retirement account, you would simply need to start taking money out of the account in order to exempt that asset for Medicaid eligibility purposes. Now for 2023, these are the resource limits for SSI and Medicaid. A single person receiving SSI benefits can never have more than $2,000 in their name or in a bank account. Any dollar above $2,000 is going to count towards their excess resources and could potentially disqualify them for SSI services. Medicaid has significantly higher resource limits. So if you have an individual who is not on SSI and is only receiving Medicaid benefits or is receiving Medicaid with Medicare because they have Social Security disability, their asset limit is up to $30,000, $182 as of this year. And that's significantly higher than it was in 2022, which I included those figures here on the screen just for your reference. We received a very significant increase to the income and resource limits for Medicaid in 2023. This is an unprecedented increase. And so what this means is that people who are not on SSI but only receiving Medicaid services have the ability to keep more money in a bank account. It doesn't always necessarily mean that you want to have $30,000 in a bank account, depending on the person's needs or ability to manage their own finances. So again, a trust or an ABLE account may still be a good fit in those instances. But generally, what we're using a trust or an ABLE account for is when you have money that goes over these limits, where you may be receiving funds or you have funds in a bank account that are above the financial limits for these programs. So examples of that could be you were applying for Social Security disability and you were waiting for things to come be approved. And now that you've been approved, you were actually owed payments from while you were applying. And so you're going to receive a retroactive benefit payment, which is going to come in the form of a lump sum. And that's going to put you over some of these either the income asset limits for Medicaid. It could also be if somebody left you an inheritance. A family member wasn't aware that they shouldn't leave the money to you directly. And so you're going to come into some money, whether it's from a payout from someone's life insurance policy, or perhaps they left you the proceeds of the sale of a home. That money would come to you directly and could impact your financial eligibility to continue to receive services through Medicaid or SSI. It can also be things like settlement awards. You're in an accident or you are entitled to receive a settlement. as a lump sum or even structured payments throughout your lifetime, those are examples of reasons to consider setting up a trust or an ABLE account to put that money aside for your benefit while preserving your financial eligibility for Medicaid and SSI. And in some cases, it's just unspent money that's accruing in your bank account, right? A person on SSI can never have more than $2,000 in their name. It can be pretty easy if you're working part-time or receiving DAC benefits to have funds accruing in your account that haven't been spent. And each month you turn over to the next calendar month, that money becomes a resource to you. And if you start to or consistently are going over that $2,000 resource limit, generally your options are spend the money on something that person wants or needs. That's certainly an option. But in some cases, if it's consistent or if it's a large amount, it may be a better option to consider using that money to fund a trust or an ABLE account. That way you have time to spend it throughout your lifetime instead of just spending it down quickly, perhaps on frivolous things, just to keep your benefits. Now, for 2023, the income limits for Medicaid also went up. Now, SSI, again, is based on having very limited income. So generally, a person receiving SSI is not going to have income that exceeds the Medicaid limits. But if you are not on SSI, you're receiving Social Security disability income, or you're in the Medicaid buy-in program and you're earning very significant income, which is rare, but can happen, income that exceeds the Medicaid allowable limits can be spent down. People with disabilities have the option to spend down that money and still qualify for Medicaid and maintain their ongoing eligibility for Medicaid services. In 2023, a single person can have up to $1,697 a month in income if it's straight basic non-Magi Medicaid, like OPWDD waiver programs. And you have much higher income options and limits if you're in the buy-in program. So up to 250% of the federal poverty level. And when you're working, you also have the option to deduct money from your earned income based on certain qualified expenses. And there's many programs in New York State that allow you to reduce your countable income when you are working. And so it allows someone to earn up to $73,932 as of this year. And again, these limits do change year over year. So it's important to know that. And income can come from a variety of different sources. Again, Social Security disability. If you've been receiving Social Security disability and you turn 65, it'll roll over to a retirement. If you were able to work during your lifetime, it's possible that you might also have a pension. And as I mentioned, that retirement account is exempt, but you have to be taking money out of it. And so the money you take out of your retirement account will be counted towards your total monthly income. Now, if your income exceeds these limits, you have a couple different options. You can pay the money to Medicaid. So let's say you're $200 over the Medicaid limit. You can cut a check to Medicaid each month to qualify and maintain eligibility for Medicaid services. It's kind of like paying a premium. Another option is you can pay medical bills and submit receipts to your local Department of Social Services or HRA if you live in one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, up to the amount of your spend down. So if your spend down is $200, you have to pay up to $200 in medical bills, and you submit those receipts to Medicaid, and then you're active for Medicaid once you have submit enough receipts. In that way, it's kind of like a deductible, right? But unfortunately, if you're giving the money to Medicaid or you're using it for medical bills, you're not able to use it for the things that you may need it for, like paying for items and services that your benefits don't provide, helping to support your living expenses so that you can live independently in your community. And so another option for someone with a disability is to deposit that excess income into a pooled trust or a special needs trust, depending on your age. This way, you're able to get the funds out of your name, still qualify for Medicaid, and have that money available to you to use. This is called a Medicaid spend down program. And it is available to people who are using community-based Medicaid services. So living in a community-based setting. as opposed to a nursing home or any sort of institutional setting. Now, before I continue and go into more detail about the different tools that help us protect these benefits in situations where you may have income or assets that are above these limits, I want to just take a moment to remind and inform everyone that for those of you who receive Medicaid or have individuals that you're working with or family members who are on Medicaid, you may be familiar with the Medicaid recertification process, which is that when you get these benefits once a year, you need to recertify that you're still eligible for Medicaid by filling out some forms and showing proof that you still meet the financial eligibility requirements. These recertifications have been on pause during the pandemic, and they are now back. They're now back again. So some of you may have already gotten information and have completed recertifications, and they're going to be based on your coverage period. So they happen different times throughout the year. So you want to be on the lookout for any paperwork from Medicaid requiring you to recertify a person's Medicaid benefits. It's important that you make sure that your contact information is up to date with your local office. If you moved, relocated to a new address, and especially if you moved to a different county, you want to make sure that your case gets moved so that when they go to send this recertification packet to you, that you receive it. Because you want to respond to these messages in a very timely manner, get back to them as quickly as possible. They only have to make 2 attempts to contact you and get in touch with you before they're able to discontinue coverage. So really important that you keep an eye out for these recertification forms and complete them as quickly as possible. You also want to be thinking about, if you have not already done your recertification, take a look at bank accounts and make sure that you're in compliance with the financial eligibility requirements, so that when you submit those forms, you're below the limits. Some people stopped paying their Medicaid spend down during the pandemic because they just were not able to do that. So now you want to make sure you've resumed those payments. If you have money that's been building up in your account, or if you received money during the pandemic, you want to make sure that that's appropriately spent down so that you're still eligible when you go to recertify. And some of the ways that you can do that is by using tools like special needs trusts and ABLE accounts. So there's special needs trusts, which is a standalone trust you typically set up with an attorney. There's also pooled trusts, which is a special type of special needs trust where it's run by a nonprofit organization. And then we have a new tool as of 2014 called ABLE accounts, which also help protect a person's financial eligibility for means-tested benefits, as long as their onset of disability is prior to age 26. And an ABLE account as of 2023 can protect up to $17,000 a year. Now, the primary purpose of setting up a special needs trust is to help a person qualify or maintain their financial eligibility for these benefits. So this is something that you may set up in advance of someone needing services, when you know that your child or loved one may need benefits in the future. But primarily, especially when it's funded with a person's own money, it's being set up at a time that you're already receiving these benefits, or you're ready to apply, and you know that you have money in your name that needs to be spent down in order to become financially eligible. Or you're on these benefits and you're receiving funds that could potentially put you over the limits to qualify for these programs. It allows someone to save for the future and not have to spend down that money quickly and all too often frivolously on things that they may not need. And it also allows you to save for the future, plan for things that you may want down the road, like going to school, going on a vacation, pursuing a new hobby. It provides financial assets and resources to an individual who needs these benefits so that they don't have to impoverish themselves to receive these services. They can have other money available to them that could give them a better quality of life. Special needs trusts are irrevocable, which is necessary to protect benefits. If you could set up this account and make changes to it anytime and pull your money out of it, it would be considered that person's money and it would not protect their financial eligibility for these services. So it's very important the trust must be irrevocable. With a special needs trust, you also have a trustee that needs to be appointed to manage the money that's in the account on behalf of the person receiving services, who's the person with a disability, who we refer to as the beneficiary. the beneficiary of the special needs trust. And these are legal tools, legal and financial tools that are allowable both under the federal government and state statute. So they're dictated not only by federal law, but also by the New York state statutes. The whole purpose of special needs trusts is these were designed for people with disabilities to give them a way to stay below these financial limits without having to impoverish themselves, and to have money available in an account that will supplement what they receive from government benefits. So it's really important that the trustee, part of the trustee's duty is understanding the rules of government benefits and being knowledgeable in how distributions from the trust or making payments out of the trust could affect a person's eligibility for services. Where, as a trustee, it's our role to ensure that we are supplementing benefits and not replacing benefits. We want to make sure the person is getting what they should be getting from Medicaid and SSI, and that their funds in their trust are being preserved to pay for quality of life things and things that go above and beyond those benefits. A trust can be funded by the individual themselves. That's called a first party trust, or sometimes they're called self-settled, where the person has money in their own name that needs to be spent down. As we mentioned, this could be they get an inheritance, they get a settlement, they have money coming to them that's going to put them over these limits. They can also be funded by a third party, someone other than the beneficiary, like a parent, a grandparent, or any interested party that wants to leave funds or assets to someone who's going to need benefits in the future or who is currently relying on government benefits and has to stay below these income and resource limits. These trusts are generally funded through a person's estate plan. And oftentimes when I'm talking to parents and families, they'll say to me, oh, well, I'm not going to have a lot of money to leave to my child or loved one. But I encourage you to consider that you don't necessarily need to have millions of dollars to potentially leave your child money that could kick them off of benefits. For someone receiving SSI, any more than $2,000 is going to cause them to lose that benefit. So even just having a life insurance policy where they're going to receive a percentage of what is paid out in that life insurance policy when you die could put someone over those limits. So really important to be considering options, and there are many ways to fund a trust for your loved one. One of the other key differences between a trust that's funded by the person themselves versus a trust that's funded by someone else is the Medicaid payback provision. And I'm going to go into this in more detail as I go through each of these examples. But just to start, I want to inform you that with a person's own money, upon their death, it's typically required that money that's left in that account would go to help repay a Medicaid lien that may be on their estate up to the amount of any states that they may have received Medicaid services from. Whereas with a third-party trust, since it's a person's a parent's money or a grandparent's money, someone that did not receive Medicaid services, there is no payback to Medicaid upon the death of the beneficiary. And I'll talk about that in more detail as we go on. So I want to talk about a little bit of the differences between these different types of trusts, and then we'll talk a little bit about ABLE accounts. So a first party supplemental needs trust, also commonly referred to as a D4A trust, or I'll say standalone trust or an individual trust, is where a person is under the age of 65. And this is a tool that allows you to protect your own income or assets as long as you are under age 65. Again, just like any supplemental needs trust, in order for it to qualify and properly protect the assets, it must be irrevocable. And because it's the person with a disability's own money, there has to be a payback provision to Medicaid. When you're setting up a standalone supplemental needs trust, it typically requires an attorney who's going to have to draft the trust document, and that document will need to be submitted to the appropriate government agencies. So if you're on SSI, it needs to go to Social Security Administration. If you're on SSI and Medicaid, it goes to both Social Security Administration and Medicaid. They need to approve the trust. So it can take some time, and it can take some financial resources to set up because you have to pay an attorney to draft the document. And those costs will vary from attorney to attorney. But it also gives you the benefits of being able to be very flexible in how you dictate the terms of the trust. You can be very specific about how you want the trust to be used, and you can put very specific clauses into the trust. You have a lot of control. You can also have control over how you want the trust to be invested, things like that. You do have to select someone to serve as the trustee. So a trust requires 3 parties: a trustee who's going to manage the money in the account, a beneficiary who's going to benefit from that money, and a donor, the person who's funding the trust. In a first-party trust, the person benefiting and the donor are the same person. And then you need to assign a trustee who will manage that money on their behalf. And that could be someone like a family member. Oftentimes, parents would like to have a family member serve as trustee, or you could hire a professional as well. And there's many different options. You can hire an individual, could be an attorney, could be a tax professional, anyone who's providing professional trustee services. And if it's a large enough sum of money, you could even go to a bank and have a financial institution serve as the trustee. Or if you're, it's a little bit more limited in the assets, you could go with a pooled trust, where you have a nonprofit organization serving as trustee and providing professional administration. And you're going to want to make sure that you also engage other professionals for financial management of those assets, and also to do tax preparation for that trust. So this is, essentially putting together a team, and sometimes your trustee may be able to handle all of that, but other times you may be hiring, individual services, and that may be the responsibility of the trustee to manage. So it's very important when you're selecting your trustee that you're really thinking about what that role really means and what you're asking that person to take on. They need to understand government benefits. They have to be knowledgeable. They have to be organized and detailed, being able to maintain receipts and report to government agencies on how the funds in the trust are being used. They have to make prudent investing decisions, and they're going to have day-to-day communication with your loved one, or you if you're the individual creating the trust. And you also want to make sure that you put successors in, right? What if that trustee is no longer able to serve, or they no longer are willing to serve when the time comes? You want to make sure you have backups. Now, pooled trusts are another option if a person has their own money that they need to protect. And pooled trusts, just like a standalone supplemental needs trust, can protect both income and assets. But the one difference here is that a pooled trust can work with someone of any age. So if someone is over the age of 65 and they're no longer able to make deposits into their standalone supplemental needs trust, they still have the option to make deposits into a pooled trust. Now, it is important to keep in mind that depending on what type of benefits you receive, there could be transfer penalties once you're over the age of 65. So if you have somebody, or if you are over the age of 65, and you want to understand what those limitations are, I encourage you to contact us, and we'd be happy to talk to you about those options. The key difference with a pooled trust is that this is managed by a nonprofit. So you don't have to select a trustee. The trustee is already in place. It's also a highly skilled nonprofit that typically specializes in working with people with disabilities. So we're sensitive to the needs of people with disabilities, and we have a lot of knowledge and experience in navigating government benefit programs and understanding the rules about how using money in the trust could potentially affect someone's financial eligibility for benefits. In New York State, we're also required to partner with a financial institution that serves as our co-trustee and manages trust investments. So in many ways, a pooled trust gives you the best of both worlds, where you have a nonprofit organization that's managing the day-to-day communication with you or your loved one, and you have a financial institution with years of experience in wealth management and fiduciary services combined. You get all of that in one place. Just like a standalone trust that has to be irrevocable. And one of the key differences is that funds in a pooled trust are pooled into one bank account. And everyone who's participating in the trust, their money is in one account, and it's invested as a larger pool. So what that means is each beneficiary owns a pro rata share of those investments, and as funds increase or decrease in value over time, those changes are distributed across the accounts. So if you've got someone who has a nominal amount of money, like $10,000 that they're getting from a benefit payment, retroactive benefit payment, that $10,000 could potentially have a little bit greater investment power in a pool versus it being in an account on its own. It also helps to spread out the costs and the administration of the trust across many individuals, which is what helps keep a pooled trust costs lower than if you were to go to a corporate bank. Typically, it's going to be less expensive to both set up and maintain. One of the other reasons why that is because the documents in a pooled trust have already been created. You don't have to have an attorney draft documents. We still strongly advise you to work with an attorney before setting up a pooled trust. You want to make sure you have legal guidance and counsel before making a decision to establish a pooled trust. But you don't have to have the documents approved per se. We do still need to submit them to Social Security Administration or Medicaid to show proof that you have set up an account and that you have properly protected the assets. But these documents have already been pre-sent to these agencies and already been approved. One other difference about a pooled trust is that pooled trust will generally only manage cash-based assets. So liquid assets. So if you wanted to, for example, leave a home to your loved one, so they could receive the proceeds from the sale of that home, you could have your executor be directed to sell that property and distribute the proceeds from the sale of that home into a pooled trust for your loved one's benefit. But the pooled trust will generally not hold real property. Every pooled trust may be a little bit different, and so you can certainly ask the pooled trust that you're considering, whether or not they manage real property. So for some families, you wanting to be able to have the property in a trust, you might want to work with an attorney separately for that. And as we mentioned, when it's the person's own money, there's that payback provision to Medicaid. That person received services throughout their lifetime. Medicaid keeps track of those, what's been spent on that person. And upon their death, they would need to repay a lien. If it's a standalone trust, and let's say there's $100,000 left in the trust when the beneficiary dies, they would pay up to the amount of the lien to the states that provided Medicaid services. With a pooled trust, the nonprofit, who generally is providing services to people with disabilities that are reimbursed by Medicaid, like NYSARC, we are part of the ARC of New York, who provide direct support services and advocacy to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so Medicaid allows the nonprofit to retain the money rather than repaying it to Medicaid. But any amount that we do not retain must be paid back to Medicaid up to the amount of their full lien. If the nonprofit chooses to retain the money, which most programs do, or retain some portion of the money, it must be used for people with disabilities that are served by their philanthropic mission. So I always tell people it's a great benefit to our organization because we're able to provide for unfunded services, things that Medicaid doesn't reimburse us for, that can give the individuals that receive services from chapters of the ARC New York more opportunities, things like recreational opportunities. It allows us to operate a guardianship program where we serve as a legal guardian for over 700 individuals across New York State. So the money gets to go back into local communities by agencies that know the needs of the individuals in their community. So really wonderful benefit to everyone involved. And now third-party special needs trust, as we spoke about earlier, is funded with someone else's money. So this is not the individual's own money. Third-party trusts are generally set up well before someone needs benefits. Hopefully, that's the goal, right? We want to make sure we have a plan in place because we all know, unexpected things come up. So this is something we really don't want to delay on doing. We want to make sure that there is a plan. And that plan can be updated, throughout your lifetime as things change. But it can also be created once you know for sure that your loved one is going to need these benefits, right? Because it's someone else's money, there's no payback to Medicaid. And these trusts are typically created through someone's will or estate plan to be funded upon the death of the donor. But it can also be created during a donor's lifetime. If the donor has money available now that they want to be able to leave to their loved one in the form of a trust. This allows a parent or a grandparent or any interested party to be able to ensure that their loved one can receive the funds that they're entitled to from their inheritance without putting these benefits at jeopardy. And a third-party trust can be created as a standalone trust, as with an attorney, same process as what I spoke about earlier when you're setting it up with your own money. And it can also be done with a nonprofit as a pooled trust. One of the benefits to the pooled trust, as I mentioned earlier, is that it has very low minimum funding requirements. And you get the benefit of working with a professional trustee. So it's a good option if you're looking for a professional to help manage that account. You can still have other family members named as advocates on that account. They can be authorized as contacts who can help inform the trustee on the things that the person wants or needs. But the discretion on how funds can be used would ultimately be given to that nonprofit. Now, there are some rules about how money in the trust can be used. The most important thing, and we're going to talk about some of the examples, but the most important rule is that the funds in a special needs trust are intended to be used for the primary benefit of the person who's receiving services. It used to be sole benefit, which is a very strict rule, and they've kind of softened that language to primary, meaning that you can make purchases that might have an intrinsic benefit on other people, but the primary benefit should be for that person. It means we generally can't buy gifts for other people with the money in the trust, and that we should be paying for items and services that are for that person. So a good example would be you live in a residential facility. We can purchase a TV for a beneficiary that would go into their room, and certainly other people can come in and join them and watch that TV with them, but it would be for their primary, area of the residence. Whereas if we got a request to buy a TV that would be in the common room of the residence, that's really the residential facility's responsibility to provide that TV, and we would not authorize using trust funds from someone's account to do that. The trustee is also responsible for looking at each request, reviewing it on a case-by-case basis to confirm that it is for that person, that it's an appropriate expense, that it's something that is going to benefit that individual, and also that we have to understand how it could impact their financial eligibility for benefits. So for example, someone who receives SSI, payments of food and shelter out of a supplemental needs trust can reduce what they get from SSI. Essentially, SSI is saying, well, if you're paying for food and rent, then why are we paying all this amount, right? So it'll have a reduction in what they get from their SSI cash payment. So generally, a trustee is going to encourage our beneficiaries to use the full balance of their SSI for rent and food, and we'll pay for things that go above and beyond that. There's also some rules about if someone is under the age of 18, the trust typically can't provide for items or services that are considered a parent or guardian's obligation to provide. And we have to keep track of how the money in the trust is being used. So we need to get copies of receipts or invoices to be able to show Medicaid or SSI or Social Security Administration if they ask what we're using the trust for. We have to have regular accounting of how the trust is being used. The trust is also typically going to make payments to third parties only, meaning you make a request for us to pay a bill, we're going to pay the vendor directly. Or if you go out and buy, let's say someone's sister goes out and buys a new pair of shoes for her brother, the sister can submit a receipt and proof of payment, and we can repay the sister for purchasing that on the beneficiary's behalf. But we can never give cash out of the account to the beneficiary or their spouse. And in some cases, if it's funds that's being used from a guardianship account, we can't reimburse a guardianship account, which would be technically considered that person's money. So we can't give them cash out of the account, and we can't put money into their bank account. That makes the money available to them. If we could just give them money out of the account when they needed it, it wouldn't protect their eligibility for benefits. So again, we pay third parties. You have something you want to buy, we pay a third party like the vendor. You can put things on a credit card and we can pay the credit card debt. So those are all ways to use money in the trust. There's also certain types of credit cards like a TrueLink card, or NYSARC has our own restricted card where we're able to authorize it at specific vendors. Those are options. And as we know, because of that payback provision to Medicaid, it's a federal policy that upon the death of the beneficiary, a first-party trust closes and the trustee cannot make any distributions from the trust before Medicaid is repaid. Can't pay any other vendors. But if you're able to pay Medicaid back and there's money left over after, it could go to other people depending on what program you're in. Typically not the case in a pooled trust, depending on how much money you have in the account. And with the third party, it's a little bit more flexible. If it's someone else's money, we may have the flexibility to pay for certain things like reasonable funeral expenses after the beneficiary's death, because there's no payback provision to Medicaid. So really important to note, while the trust can pay for funeral expenses, if it's the person's own money, you want to make sure you do that ahead of time through a Medicaid irrevocable pre-need funeral arrangement, for example, so that that's prepaid for. And that's really important, that it must be an irrevocable funeral arrangement. You can call a funeral home, you can ask them about that. They should be very familiar with that process. You essentially set up the arrangements ahead of time. You make payments either as a lump sum or you pay it down over time, and everything is set up and taken care of. And the funeral home can't return the money to you, which would potentially kick someone off benefits.
Sarah, this is Farah here. Please, excuse me, just a quick reminder that we have 5 minutes before we start taking questions.
All right, wonderful. So with that, I'm going to kind of get to our ABLE account section because I really want to make sure I get you guys information on that. But just know that the trustee that you appoint to manage this account will have the sole discretion on how funds can be used. And that is so that we're protecting the beneficiary. Trustee is a fiduciary that's obligated to act in the best interest of that beneficiary. And they have the ultimate discretion to say yes or no if they think something is an appropriate expense or if they're concerned that an expense may impact someone's eligibility for benefits. These are some examples, and this is just a very short list. The list of things that a trust can pay for is really infinite, but these are some of the examples of things that people commonly use the trust to pay for. And if a person is on SSI, keep in mind that those food and shelter items could reduce benefits. So those are asterisks here on the screen. Those are things that we may not pay for to be able to keep their SSI. And then there are some things that we can't pay for. A lot of this I've gone over, but again, it's all about, it's got to be for that person's primary benefit. We have to consider whether or not something we're paying for will impact their eligibility for benefits. And in our program, we have restrictions on paying for things like alcohol, tobacco, firearms. Our goal is to provide for things that will improve a person's quality of life. And so it's important to know when you're working with a trustee or a pooled trust, what are their limitations. Now, ABLE accounts are another tool that became available in 2014. And a lot of parents or families will ask me, do I need a trust or an ABLE account? And I always really want people to understand that it's really not an either or. ABLE accounts and special needs trusts each provide unique benefits and advantages to people with disabilities. So it's really about having a viable option in addition to a special needs trust rather than instead of a trust. Now, what's unique about ABLE accounts is it allows a person to save funds for disability-related expenses. As we spoke about earlier, you have to be disabled prior to age 26. And one of the key differences with an ABLE account is the account is actually owned by the person or a designated representative who they appoint, as opposed to a trustee managing it. So an ABLE account can be a good option when somebody can have direct access to funds and can typically manage their own finances to some degree. It's their responsibility to keep track of how they're using the money in the ABLE account so that they can prove to the IRS that it's being used for qualified disability expenses. So there's some responsibility there, and there's some documentation that's going to be needed. So you want to make sure the person is willing and able to do that. Another benefit to the ABLE account is the money in an ABLE account will grow tax-free as long as it is spent on qualified expenses. Tell people it's like a health savings account, right? Like if you use your health savings account for non-health related expenses, you could get taxed. And that's similar to the ABLE account. And you can only have one. You can only have one ABLE account. Where a special needs trust, you can have a first party trust, you can have a third party trust, you could even have a pooled trust and a standalone trust. An ABLE account, you can only have one, and your own money as well as money from third parties would go into that one account. And that means that all of that money is subject to Medicaid payback upon the death of the beneficiary or account holder in this case. You can only put up to $17,000 a year into an ABLE account, which is why, again, sometimes if you're receiving a very large sum of money, an ABLE account's not going to be able to protect all of that money. It's only going to be able to protect up to $17,000 a month, and that's from any source. There's higher limits if you are working and not contributing to a retirement account. And ABLE accounts are primarily going to protect assets, excess resources, money that becomes a resource the following month. ABLE accounts cannot reduce countable income for Medicaid or SSI purposes. So like if you have a Medicaid spend down and you have to give up excess income each month to keep Medicaid, you can't deposit that income into an ABLE account and expect it to qualify you for Medicaid. You have to use a pooled trust or a supplemental needs trust. And if you're working and earning income, putting money into the ABLE account is something you can do once it becomes a resource the following month. But you can't put it in within the month you get it and have it not count against you by reducing your SSI cash payment. And for a person who receives SSI, they can never have more than $100,000 in the account. Anything above that will be counted as an available resource. These are some examples of the categories that are qualified disability expenses. And the most important thing to note here is that these are broad, right? So it's up to the individual to be able to substantiate to the IRS that something that they used out of the ABLE account did fall into one of these categories. Again, health and wellness expenses, is a pretty broad category, right? A lot of people will say, can I use my ABLE account to go on vacation? Well, you may be able to argue that that was health and wellness, but I can also tell you that if you use the trust money in a supplemental needs trust to pay for a vacation, there will be no question, right? So again, there are advantages to each of these programs. The other thing is that ABLE accounts, and I have it bolded here on the screen, can be used for housing and basic living expenses without reducing SSI. So this is where you have a special needs trust that can't pay for rent or food without reducing SSI. But if you have money in an ABLE account, you could potentially help pay a person's rent and it would not reduce their SSI. So again, there are benefits to having each of these tools. These are some resources for you if you're considering an ABLE account that I encourage you to look into. There's a great resource center that helps you compare different state plans. You don't have to use the New York State program. It allows you to compare different programs and figure out what one makes the most sense for you. And this is just a summary of what we just spoke about and some of the key differences between special needs trusts and ABLE accounts. And just for the purposes of time, I'm not going to review these again, but to give you kind of a quick summary, special needs trust, you have a trustee that's overseeing the use of the funds and making appropriate and wise decisions about how the funds are being used. ABLE account, you're going to be managing on your own. There's no age limit to S&Ts. To be eligible for an ABLE account, you have to have been disabled prior to age 26. The other thing is about contributions, right? So there's no limit on what you can put in a special needs trust. There's no maximum account balance, but ABLE account will have limitations on how much you can put into it. There's some differences in how things are invested and how taxes are charged. And then there's those payback provisions. So again, if you're a third party, a parent or a loved one who wants to put money in an ABLE account for your child, just know that if they don't use it during their lifetime, it would go to repay Medicaid. Where if you put it into a supplemental needs trust, it would not. It would be able to go to other people as named, as directed by the donor in the documents. So we have some examples here, and I just want to check in on time. If we want to go to questions, I can certainly run through these examples quickly.
As we have about 1 minute before we get into questions.
All right, great. So I've just got a couple of examples here to help kind of summarize all of this for everybody. So we have Sally. She gets Medicaid and SSI. So SSI right there is going to tell us that she can't have more than $2,000 in her name. Her mother recently passed away and she left her an inheritance. She did not set up a third-party trust. She wasn't aware that she should do that. And unfortunately, she had the funds left directly to Sally. Now, that doesn't mean that Sally can't keep her benefits. She still has the option to protect that money by creating her own trust, a first party or self-settled trust, so she can maintain those benefits. And since it's such a significant sum of money, she can't put all of it into an ABLE account, but she can put a portion into an ABLE account and the remaining balance into a pooled trust. That way she has some money in an ABLE account where she has direct access to it, can help support her month-to-month expenses, maybe even help supplement her rent payment. And then she can use the money in her trust to do more quality of life things or things that go above and beyond benefits. So she wants to be able to go back to school and go on a vacation every year. So she's going to use her trust for that. Lisa is 45, so under the age of 65. She was recently disabled in an accident. Now she utilizes a wheelchair. She gets Social Security disability income because she was able to work during her lifetime, and she needs home care services to be able to support her ability to live independently. Her SSDI check is a little over that $1,600 a month limit. And so she's got to deposit excess income each month into a pooled trust in order to maintain her benefits. She's been on Medicaid for a while, and now she's going to be coming into a large sum of money from her settlement. And because she was disabled after the age of 26, she's not eligible to put any money in an ABLE account, but she can deposit that money into her trust to keep her benefits. That allows her to use it throughout her lifetime rather than having to spend it very quickly to keep Medicaid. And John is our final example before we open up to questions. John has a developmental disability and he gets Medicaid and SSI. So again, SSI is going to tell us right away he can't have more than $2,000 in a bank account. He lives at home with his parents and he works part-time at the local grocery store, so he's earning a little bit of money. He does drive himself to work and he occasionally needs money for gas and food and other personal items throughout the week. But despite those monthly expenses, he lives at home with his parents, so he doesn't have a lot of expenses. His bank account keeps going over that $2,000 limit or getting really close to that $2,000 limit each month. And he has to spend money on things he doesn't really need just to stay below that limit. By opening up an ABLE account, he can make periodic deposits, and he could do this in a pooled trust also. It just would have to be enough money that made it worth it. He puts deposits each month as needed into these accounts so that he can maintain his SSI payments. And the ABLE account is really an inexpensive option that gives him direct access to that money and gives him a vehicle to save for the future. So in summary, we just want the key takeaway for everyone today is that you yourself or your loved one or individuals you're working with have options when it comes to making sure that you can qualify for these benefits and maintain financial eligibility and still have money available to you to pay for things that those benefits don't provide. And with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Sarah. So I have about a few questions. One is pertaining to the example that you just had about Sally. So the question is, does Sally lose her housing and all other Medicaid and SSI benefits the moment she gets the unplanned inheritance? How quickly does those benefits have to go into the pooled trust or ABLE account?
Sure, that's a good question. So if you receive funds from any source, it's counted as income in the month that you receive it, and then it's an available resource the following month. So it kind of depends on when you get that money. You want to make sure that it's out of your name and transferred to a qualified supplemental needs trust or an ABLE account before the beginning of the next month, which is when it will count. And so sometimes it can be 30 days, but it can even be shorter than that in some instances. I mean, again, you do have options to do things like spend down some of that money, on items and services at fair market value for that person. But sometimes you just don't have enough time to do that. You want to transfer it to one of those accounts, and then that buys you the time to make purchases down the road. Another important detail to that specific example is that the individual is in a low-income apartment. So that can vary from apartment to apartment if you're receiving HUD benefits, how they treat that. But you do have the option to put it into a trust. It shouldn't count against the person. But when you're receiving those services, it's important that the trustee understands how distributions from the account could affect that benefit. Income that is paid out of the trust, so using income versus the principal balance of that trust, could be counted as income to that person as we're making payments out of the trust. And so what that could do is it could potentially increase her rental obligation for the HUD.
Okay. And so another question, I think you touched upon this, but it's a little different. I think you described someone buying or selling their house and leaving the proceeds to their child. This question says if they want to leave the actual home to their child, will Medicaid place a lien on the property?
So they have the option to, and that would be one of the reasons why you would want to protect that. So if you have the desire to leave real property to your loved one and you want to make sure that Medicaid can't put a lien on it, I would strongly encourage you to speak with an elder law or special needs attorney who can help you decide what options you have to protect that home. If you don't protect it, yes, it is entirely possible that Medicaid could put a lien on it. If you do, and you do it properly, they won't be able to, and you'd be able to transfer that to other families, members, or whoever you'd like that to go to.
And just last question, what are the fees associated with the NYSARC or ABLE account?
Sure. So fees are going to vary from trust to trust and administrator to administrator. NYSARC has a variety of different programs. So I'll give you just kind of a quick overview. If you're using a trust to protect excess resources, assets, the fees are going to be a percentage of the balance at the end of the prior month. And so our organization as a nonprofit who administers the trust charges a percentage of the balance. I believe it's 0.9%. And then the investment co-trustee, our co-trustee also charges 0.75%. So less than 2% for the year. And that's charged at a monthly rate, minimum of $20 a month. You'll generally find that it's going to be much lower than most other professional options. However, it can vary. If you're spending down income for Medicaid purposes, it's going to be based on the amount you deposit. And we have a sliding scale where there's ranges starting at $30 a month. And then those fees go up based on the amount you're depositing. Those fees are publicly available on our website. And we also have a fee calculator. So when you go to our site, you pick the program you're looking for, you can put that amount that you're planning to fund the trust with, and it will compute the fees for you. To give you a more specific example. And unfortunately, I don't have the fee schedule in front of me. I wasn't planning to talk too much about our services. We're hoping to, just be talking educationally. But if you have questions about that, please call us and we'd be happy to go over that. We need to know how much it is that you're putting into the trust, and we can help you determine what the cost would be.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have. I want to thank you, Sarah, for joining us today, and everyone joining us virtually. Following the conclusion of the event, you will receive an email with a link with a survey. Please complete for your chance to win an Amazon gift card. The next session we have after lunch will be adulting, effectively preparing individuals with ASD. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yes, thank you guys so much for joining us. And please feel free to call us if you have any further questions. We'd be happy to be a resource to you. Have a great day.